This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
On January 27, 2011, the day after Ellen's body was found, detectives spoke with her parents. The Greenbergs were reeling at the idea that their daughter took her own life.
Suicide was the farthest thing from Ellen's world.
Sandy told investigators Ellen might have experienced some anxiety about her job and the wedding, but Sandy wasn't concerned.
She was getting up and going to work every day, functioning, but stressed.
She had told me that she felt anxious and overwhelmed about her teaching and planning a wedding.
Still, Ellen's friends were stunned by the news. Suicide didn't make any sense.
She was over the moon about her engagement.
4 days before Ellen's death, we all received the save the date in the mail. I remember calling her on the phone saying, "Oh my God, they're so beautiful," and she was so excited.
As friends and family struggled to understand what happened, an autopsy was performed the day after Ellen died.
At autopsy, 10 stab wounds to the back of the victim's neck were discovered.
The autopsy revealed approximately 19 stab wounds and 1 cut wound. The decedent had multiple wounds to the front of her body as well as to the back of her neck. She had approximately 10 stab wounds to the back aspect of her neck. It's difficult to inflict those type of wounds on yourself.
The examination also revealed that Ellen had multiple bruises over parts of her body. What caused the bruising?
Some of them were relatively new, some were a little bit older. She could have engaged in some contact sport. She could have bumped into certain things. It could be done from a blow of the fist.
When the autopsy was over, the medical examiner issued a ruling that directly contradicted the initial findings of police investigators.
The medical examiner believed it was a homicide. One of the most striking things was the fact that a knife was still embedded in this young woman's chest. There is a significant degree of force probably needed to inflict that type of wound. That certainly is indicative of a homicide.
The ME's homicide ruling officially turned Ellen's case into a murder investigation as the Greenbergs prepared to bury their only child. The truth about whether Ellen Greenberg was murdered or died by suicide appeared to hinge on the findings of an outside expert. The expert focused on a stab wound on the back of Ellen's neck.
There was a stab wound that involved a portion of her spinal cord, but it was not severe enough to render her immediately paralyzed. She still could have gone on to inflict the other wounds herself.
In a remarkable turn of events, nearly 3 months after Ellen's fatal stabbing, the medical examiner changed the ruling from homicide to suicide.
There were several facts that certainly indicated a suicide. They were the superficial stab wounds to the portions of the body. That typically does not happen in a homicidal case. I have seen other people who've stabbed themselves and cut themselves multiple times. It's rare, it's not unheard of. It is not physically impossible for someone to inflict that on themselves.
In revising his ruling, the ME agreed with the police that Ellen Greenberg took her own life.
20 self-inflicted wounds from front and back. Suicide? Really?
So when I heard that Ellen had multiple stab wounds, like 20, I could not believe that somebody could do this to some other human being. Somebody definitely had some anger issues. I just cannot imagine that someone could keep on stabbing someone that many times. It made me sick. So when they changed it back to suicide, I was so angry. There was no explanation other than she had no defensive wounds on her hands, but that didn't account for the fact that maybe she was hit from the back. Maybe she was knocked out. How could anybody stab themselves this many times? We were all so angry.
I remember her being very nervous about what the psychiatrist could reveal to other people. She wanted to be sure that what she said to the psychiatrist was not going to leave that office. I remember telling her, Ellen, that psychiatrist cannot say anything to anyone unless she feels like you or somebody else's safety is at risk. And she had told me in a text message that the doctor had put her on medication. She had said the doctor put her on Klonopin, and I said, "Do you feel better?" And she replied, "So much better." When I'd heard what had happened, there was never a doubt in my mind that she could have done that to herself. She was a girly girl. How could anyone say that that was suicide?
It was hard for me to imagine Ellen taking her own life, but then knowing that the apartment was locked from the inside made it harder to imagine a murder. But I know and knew at the time that it's not impossible to lock those kind of locks from the outside.
I think it was a mistake to call the latching mechanism the sort of the definitive or defining moment in the investigation. I challenge those conclusions. I don't agree with those conclusions. I don't think the evidence points any more in that direction than it does homicide. I was never satisfied, still not satisfied, probably never will be satisfied.
So one of the accounts that I've come upon in sort of this like onslaught of information is that, okay, Sam Goldberg calls 911 at 6:31 p.m. At 6:33 p.m., the dispatch goes out to emergency responders to go to the apartment. And then at 6:40, we have Ellen Greenberg being pronounced dead by medic number 5. All right, so a total amount of time of 9 minutes has elapsed since the 911 call was made. Now, according to an account of it, actually in several places, when first responders arrive at the apartment, Sam Goldberg is present, as well as his uncle, James C. Schwartzman.
What time was that again?
He makes the 911 call at 6:31 p.m. Emergency responders are dispatched at 6:33 p.m.
Okay.
And Ellen Greenberg is pronounced dead at 6:40 p.m.
And the uncle arrives when?
He's at the apartment when first responders arrive, according to some accounts. Now, it would be extraordinarily helpful to understand why he was there. However, there are no statements given from any witnesses because this was not investigated as a homicide or a suicide. It doesn't really appear to be investigated at all. Now, I think the account of him breaking into the apartment, I think it's based solely on the 911 call.
Well, they do sort of interview him. There's an initial interview mentioned.
Well, he's taken away in handcuffs from the scene to be questioned by police. But I'm just saying, I can't find any sort of, the report on her death is very short, considering all the hubbub that's happening 10 going on 11 years later. It's very short.
We don't have the police side. We have the medical examiner side.
Well, I actually found some of the police's side of it.
But
if that's all there is, not much. Well, there's a report of the death investigation by Detective Sierra, homicide.
Okay.
Of course, I guess the death investigation, the investigator. Let me just send this over to you. You can take a look at it.
Okay.
So, what do you think about if the uncle was in fact
having Uncle Lawyer there? Uncle Lawyer being there is suspicious.
And now I don't know it for certain because, like I said, there's not a whole lot of information. I was just so shocked by that. If it's been stated, and there's not really a place to say if it's accurate or not, because to me, if he was at the scene, regardless of his status in any situation, he should have been interviewed as a witness.
I would tend to agree with that. I have multiple items here. It looks like Gavin Fish kind of covered this at one point, and he put up a lot of the case documents. If you don't know who Gavin Fish is, he's a YouTuber. He put up a bunch of the case documents, so I see what you're talking about here.
I believe that's where I got it from. I clicked on a link from the 911 call.
Well, he's even got surveillance stuff up from the lobby where when the fire department arrived. Well, I know they're medics for this situation, but they're in turnout gear. When they arrive, he's got some photos up there. I see the layout of the apartment. And I have not listened to any of his stuff on this. Here's Detective Sierra. Oh, you sent me the same thing he has. Okay, I see what you're doing.
I sent it from there, actually. Yeah.
Got it. So, looking at this,
I'm
this
just
is just a
saying
little piece of a report, though.
It's reported. Is it not a link?
Yeah. It's a link, but it's only a piece of the report that's at the link. The link only has a page for me.
Oh, no. It's got more.
Oh, well, hold on. I can pull it up because I now have it.
I think it's the whole report. I wanted to see.
Hold on. I'm pulling it up to look at it. Okay, it looks like I have 3 pages.
Yeah, it seems right.
This is really strange, actually. This looks pretty consistent with what we saw from the medical examiner's investigation. In fact, they're so in lockstep, I have questions because he does get into a little bit more. Excuse me, who is Detective Sierra? Do you know Sierra's first name?
No.
Detective Sierra gets into a little bit more detail. I will say that overall, it looks remarkably similar to the medical examiner's investigative report. Okay, so look, I'm looking at it. I don't see anything in here that's going to put me way off. So, all right. So the phone calls that we have, the phone calls that he made apparently were right before the 911 call. And your point is one's to his dad and one is to Uncle Lawyer, who is now Uncle Judge.
I don't see anything. Now, okay, but I just want to be clear. There's not cell phone records of Sam Goldberg. It's accounts of what happened. And,
right.
And so there was no investigation. So I can't, because the investigation wasn't done, I can't substantiate it with part of the official case file.
Well, we can't see all of the official case file. We see bits and pieces. I'm saying there might be more.
Okay, well, I feel very confident in saying that he wasn't investigated.
Okay, so he is not to be investigated. Is that what you're saying? Like, that's not the thing for me. The thing is, you're saying
I'm saying it would be helpful to see his cell phone records if he had been investigated. And I can't, so just because they're not I think it's relevant that he made 2 phone calls. The fact that it has also been stated that not only did he call him, but within 9 minutes, sometime between the 911 call and the first responders responding, he was able to get to the apartment, and it was during a blizzard.
Maybe he lived there. This is Philadelphia. It's not like the places we're used to where it's big spread out cities. I'm just saying, maybe he lives close by.
I feel like the economics of the situation would lend to say that he would live not there, but
it's a nice apartment.
It is a nice apartment. I assume the one he lives in is probably even nicer. I don't know. I did look briefly and I got sidetracked because of what I sent you. I was looking for his address at the time.
Okay, so I've gone through some of the different things that we've collected from the document cloud, some of the public record stuff, some of the Gavin Fish stuff. So I do find it interesting. One of the things in here, there's a detective, and I don't know his name, so I apologize. Scott Ehlman. So Scott Ehlman is, I guess, hired by the family. And he's looking at it from a sort of a counterpoint to the medical examiner in a way. He picks it up and he basically has what he calls attorney work product. It says personal and confidential at the top. He appears to be attached back to the Wayne K. Ross report, but this is his detective, his investigator, his medico-legal guy. And in April 2017 is when he compiles a report. He includes in there the Cyril Wecht report, which is the one that basically it's the kickoff for all of this. Okay, here's my thing. I went looking to see if I could find a case that matched this. And, I love these rabbit holes, so thanks for that. Because when I go down them, I end up in what I call the NHI links. It's like where
the
people
armpit of hell.
Well, it's these really, I'll give you an example of something I read related to trying to figure all this out. I'm just going to read the title in the abstract, and then I'm going to tell you why I was reading all of this. 8 cases of suicide by self-cutting or stabbing, consideration from a medico-legal viewpoint of differentiation between suicide and homicide. The abstract on this is, the present article describes 8 cases of suicide by self-cutting or stabbing. 7 of the deceased had a history of psychiatric problems. In every case, sharp weapon injuries were observed at typical sites of self-inflicted injury. The self-inflicted injuries varied in severity from a single stab wound to multiple cut wounds. In 4 cases, hesitation marks were found. Among the remaining 4 cases without hesitation marks, only one of them had clothing injuries. Based on the scene investigation by police, it was deduced that each body had been found at or very near the place where the fatal injuries had been sustained. In 2 cases, toxicological analysis played an important role in discriminating suicide from homicide. In one case, a 52-year-old man stabbed himself fatally after potassium hydroxide ingestion. In another case, a 71-year-old man committed suicide by self-cutting and stabbing after drinking an alkaline detergent solution. In 5 of the 8 cases, unusual findings such as a single stab wound, multiple cut injuries, no hesitation mark, or presence of clothing injuries were found. In these 5 cases, the psychiatric history of the deceased contributed to furthering our comprehension of these unusual findings. We believe that thorough toxicological analysis and scene investigation, as well as autopsy, are essential in discriminating between homicide and suicide in similar cases. Furthermore, forensic pathologists and forensic physicians at the scene should obtain as much information as possible on the victim's previous character, including previous psychiatric history, in order to elucidate his or her manner of death. Now, what I'm reading from here, the publication date of this is something that was put out a long time ago. This is actually put out in 1997. I went down a path. So I'm just going to read titles for a second. An unusual death by transcranial stab wound, homicide or suicide. An autopsy case of suicide by multiple self-cutting over the chest and neck. A fatal case of suicidal stabbing and cutting. Complex suicide by self-stabbing and drowning. A case report and a review of the literature. Unusual attempted suicide or covered attempted homicide. A neck stabbing case report and review of literature. I will put a link in here for this because I'm linking all of this stuff because people can go and do their own research. And I think in cases like this, it's honestly such a whodunit, and it's so weird that I think people should. And I don't say that a lot because I don't want people to just go, oh, well, whatever they're saying either makes sense or doesn't make sense, or they don't know what they're talking about. So I'm going to put this abstract in there, and then you can sort of start, because it will take you to a lot of similar articles. And this stuff ranges from like the mid-90s to as recent as 2021. That's not the most interesting part of what I got into. And I got into this next part because of you. I will probably include this link, but I'm telling you now, I don't trust the link. I do trust the report. It was a pretty unusual PDF I came across, and I think you took a look at it. Did you take a look at this one?
Yes.
So this ties back to a question you asked in an earlier episode, and I mentioned multiple times at this point. You wanted to know what type of suicide came with like multiple stabbings. You were basically saying,
know if people committed suicide by stabbing themselves multiple times.
Yeah, and
does that happen?
Yeah, you weren't saying like 3 or 4 times. You wanted to know if like somebody had like 20 some times stab wounds.
Yeah, I'm not really sure like how I looked, and at first I wasn't really getting a whole lot of results. I did come across some of the things that you were talking about. I get really squeamish about stuff, so I don't typically read that kind of thing.
When you do that, though, you're still able to get a pretty good equivocal death analysis, like by reading even just the summary reports and skipping past the wound stuff. You'll go back and read what you need to if you have questions or ask questions about it, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I feel like it's not great that I can't really get through it, but I do manage to, pick myself back up and keep going. I don't know why I put myself through that.
I'm going to be pretty careful with the next part because this is another mystery death that they put together a pretty good case file on it. The content is sound. This is from March 2011 that I'm reading from. They approached a couple of cases, including one that had multiple stab wounds like you're describing. You actually mentioned his name to me. His name is Captain Gordon Hess. He was a U.S. Army captain. He has an interesting death. I'm going to go over just the scientific method for investigators here, and then I'm going to read some about this case. One is you obtain from witnesses the accounts of what happened. Step 2 is based on those accounts, you anticipate the questions you will be asked by others so that you can properly collect and record the physical evidence. 3, you then collect and record the physical evidence, take your photos and do your documentation, even to scale. 4, step 4, you formulate hypotheses about the events that occurred and anticipate the questions you'll be asked. 5, you determine whether or not the witness's statements are consistent with the physical evidence, and you gather more information or evidence as needed. Number 6 is through the process of verifying witness statements, admissions, confessions, you consider the evidence in hand and you disprove as many hypotheses as you can, or you rule them out. And step number 7 is you formulate a final hypothesis or an assessment to a reasonable degree of certainty, recognizing that there potentially could be existing limitations in there. So that's what you're doing as a forensic person at a scene. And that's what these other reports that people are talking about, I'm sure they're talking about them in the podcast. I've seen that they show up in interviews and YouTube videos. I'm not talking about the whole reports there. I'm just talking about that's where it's supposed to come from, that a new report can be made. But at that point, they're talking to the original pathologist or medical examiner and the original police at the scene, possibly the EMTs or firefighters that were there. This case study and scene comes from an online blog, and it seems to be cribbed from another blog, but I can't find the first one. So I'm just using this. You can, if you look up Investigative Sciences Journal, you can, take what you may for that. I don't know if it's legit or not. I just know that this is a case I was able to verify a lot of facts from. So this is from March of 1998. There was a deceased person, previously mentioned, Gordon Hess, who was a captain in the Army National Guard from the state of New York, who was conducting annual training or participating in annual training at Fort Knox in Kentucky. About 4:45 on the morning of March 3rd, 1998, Hess was seen by his bunkmates leaving the area dressed in his U.S. Army issued physical training gear, which consisted of sweatpants and a hooded U.S. Army sweatshirt. He stopped by his wall locker and he grabbed his wallet as he left the building. And then he went to another building and had a cup of coffee. But the coffee had not been, he went to another building to get a cup of coffee, but it had not been made yet. This was the last time that Hess was seen alive. It was also noted that this rising at 04:45, very early in the morning, was almost an hour earlier than Hess's normal rise at 05:45. So this is out of character for him because he was known to be a little bit of a late sleeper in terms of the training. He then failed to show up for breakfast and failed to report for duty that day. A close colleague spent most of the day searching for Hess at nearby hotels, train stations, hospitals, airlines, and he called home. About 1600 hours, March 3rd, he officially reported to superiors that he believed Hess was missing. The MPs and many others conducted a search for Hess until darkness had set in to no avail. The following morning, which was March 4th, 1998, they reinitiated the search, and this resulted in Hess's body being located about 0800 hours, face down in a small creek bed or ravine with shallow water, still on the base, close to his barracks. He was dressed in the same sweatpants and jacket as previously mentioned when he was last seen alive. The soldiers turned Hess over. They pulled his head and shoulders out of the water, which had become bloody. Then one soldier covered his head with a field jacket out of respect for Hess and what is considered to be a pretty typical human reaction. And then they referenced the photos that are shown below, which I edited out of your version. So they have these two photos in here, and photo one shows the proximity to the base, and photo one is a close-up of the body, and photo two is the proximity to the base of where the body was. The crime scene perimeter was marked off some distance away from where Hess's body was. They're just making a notation here because they quickly established security of the body after its discovery, and this was maintained throughout the scene processing. There's crime scene tape up that goes, they've got a good 100 yards around the body covered. The Army CID was the lead investigative agency charged to conduct the death investigation. From the onset, they treated it as a suspicious death leaning towards homicide, which means they conducted a homicide investigation. With this charge, they began crime scene processing. They detailed agents to canvass the area, interviewed all those in the unit that knew Hess. They collected any information that would help prepare the victimology report, all while looking for reasons why Hess's death occurred that would lead to potential suspects. During the course of the canvass of all unit members, no interpersonal conflicts or grudges or motives to hurt Hess were uncovered or revealed. He was well liked by many of his fellow soldiers who commented that Hess's demeanor significantly changed after a fratricide incident, which Hess became hesitant and unaggressive in their practical exercise, which is out of character for him. I'll get to that in a second. But fratricide it's the employment of friendly weapons resulting in the unforeseen and unintentional death or injury of friendly personnel or damage to personal vehicle. In this particular case, during a computer-based battlefield simulation, Hess's unit, under his direction, killed the members of two friendly companies. So this had been I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you, what I just said?
Yes.
So they were doing a simulation, and they ended up killing friendlies. It was a friendly fire incident, but it was a simulation.
Right, and he is very distraught over this.
Yeah, it bothered him, and it has a bearing on this investigation that it happened.
I mean, do you think that he realized that it wasn't real?
You know, they're sort of programmed to take it pretty seriously. You're talking
I
98.
understand that, but I feel like that that would have been pretty much a guarantee that it would never happen in real life because he learned from that, no question.
Yeah,
Which is the point of the simulations, right?
Yeah, that's the point of the simulation. I mean, really, I don't know how much of a bearing that would have for me. Were I to be investigating it, it would have some bearing. I don't think I would give it as much as these guys did.
You don't think that because to me, well, actually, I'm going to let you finish.
Well, so this is sort of the wrap up on what they're saying here in this first part. It says ultimately there were no signs of a struggle anywhere near the body site in the ravine. Soldiers had walked in and around the scene prior to the arrival of CID. This was the people who found him. One of those soldiers that found Hess left his coffee mug on a nearby rock, while another soldier threw a cigarette in the water. And while it's not acceptable that happened, there are very few crime scenes that have not been altered or contaminated prior to the arrival of an investigating agency or representative. It's something that they deal with every day, and they want to minimize these intrusions, but that wasn't considered to be all that interesting. This is how they wrap it up. Besides Hess's body, the crime scene search resulted in the recovery of a bloody Leatherman tool knife, which I'll explain in a second, from under the edge of a nearby rock. This became critical because the crime lab was able to identify the blood on the knife portion of the tool as that of Hess. Closer views of the tool are in the photos below, and no other blood types were detected. Furthermore, Hess had his wallet with all the contents, his keys, ring, and the case for a Leatherman's tool with the instructions in his pockets. They learned that Hess had brought the Leatherman's tool the previous morning to replace one he lost sometime in the past. The plastic covering to the tool and case were found discarded in a nearby dumpster, and a latent print examination of that container found Hess's prints on it. So Leatherman's tool is not just a knife. It's like a folding multi-tool. They've decided that it's his. They go back, they do an autopsy. The end result of this case, in spite of everything, is that they believe he killed himself. He has a lot of stab wounds. I think he had 26 stab wounds. What got me on it was the one through the clothing. Like, he unzipped his clothes after he stabbed himself the first time or two.
Did you put the black boxes on my copy of the report? Or were they like that? Do you have black boxes on yours?
Okay, so the report has 2 black boxes.
Okay.
That were there when I got it. I put the rest on there. Do you need it unblack boxed?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I was just really confused by that initially, but it makes sense now. And I'm pretty sure you told me you were going to do that.
Anything that was super graphic, I blacked out. Where I'm going with this, and I can keep talking about this guy all day long, because they go through and they reference other cases where people have killed themselves by stabbing themselves multiple times. And now I want to go look at every single one of them because this is baffling to me.
Well, and you said you were talking about that he unzipped his clothing. Now, from what I gathered, it was like perhaps he initially, because he was wearing his he was wearing a hoodie and a t-shirt, right? I mean, it's an army hoodie and t-shirt. Okay. And so it seemed almost like he punctured the hoodie and made a mark on himself. And he's like, well, that's stupid. I should just take off my hoodie. Right.
Yeah.
And he goes on and he takes it off. And then it looks like there's like several stab marks on through the t-shirt. So like the t-shirt's less thick. It's not as thick as the hoodie. And so he's stabbing himself, through the t-shirt. And I'm not sure, did he go ahead and, he's found with his shirt on, it seems like.
He's partly dressed.
I was just curious.
He took off the thicker shirt and he just went for the t-shirt, then he goes underneath.
But did he leave his shirt on or did he take it off?
The hoodie gets unzipped. It only has one puncture defect. The t-shirt stays on, and it has multiple puncture defects that correspond to the injuries.
Okay, and then did he stab himself under his shirt?
I could not answer that definitively from what they've released. There's a possibility there are a couple stabs under the shirt.
Okay. Do you think that he killed himself?
You sort of asked me that, and I smarted off the first time I read it, and I said something to the effect of probably not or highly unlikely. But based on, I think that this will be forever a suicide. But his family had the same response that Ellen's family had. So he was married, and his widow, to this day, does not believe that he killed himself. The way that they run this down, they do a psychological autopsy as well. So a forensic autopsy is just a body's report, and then a psychological autopsy is a victimology report. It's a reconstruction of the decedent's behavior, personality, frame of mind at the time of death. In some reports, it's called victimology reporting because they're looking to see, like, they may be trying to profile a perpetrator, but in this instance, they're not really profiling anyone. They run down a list in a psychological autopsy of 12 things. So thing one is, once Captain Hess learned of the fratricide incident, he reportedly took the criticism more harshly than intended, which is sort of what you were headed towards. And the second thing is, during the day that followed that incident, Captain Hess was quiet, showed little emotion. During the next training simulation, Captain Hess seemed apprehensive and reluctant to engage an enemy. The fourth, the commander was critical of all the companies, did not single out one single commander. Later, Hess approached the commander, obviously concerned over his actions causing the fratricide, and asked the commander how he was doing. The commander assured Hess he had nothing to worry about. And these are officers, like, these are not enlisted men, so it's a little different. The fifth thing they have in the autopsy here is, during the next evening, Hess had dinner and some beer with fellow soldiers watching training videos, and they went bowling. At around 11 o'clock, when his bunkmate went to bed, Hess was up and reading a training manual. The sixth thing is, the following day, he got up earlier than usual. He was seen entering the after-action area with his face flush, bloodshot eyes, and dripping with sweat. So he'd had an emotional and a physiological reaction, according to the last mission of the day, people observing him. The seventh thing was, that evening while talking to his wife, she reported that Hess sounded frustrated and that he was not getting enough practice and he was being rushed through the training. Also, another company from New York was blaming him for everything that went wrong, according to her. She told investigators that during the phone conversation, Hess frequently sighed and he would not complete all of his sentences. The eighth thing was, the same evening, after a few beers, Hess was observed as being despondent, lying in bed in his PT gear, reading a book on tank operations, and he allegedly told another captain he was upset and blamed himself for the failed exercises. At 11:40, we have the ninth thing. That's a senior officer saw Hess pacing the floor outside of his room. As he approached Hess said that he wanted to discuss the incident. They went outside the building, where Hess was observed being visibly upset and shivering. According to the senior officer, Hess looked exhausted, nervous, and emotional. The 10th thing is, on the following day after learning of Hess's disappearance, the senior officer feared Hess might have killed himself. So that's the same guy. The 11th thing is, another captain who is a detective with the state police from New York told the evaluator he found it odd that the bunkmate searched hotels, airports, and bars for the missing Hess instead of looking for him on base, where he was known to run and could have injured himself, as if he had suspected that Hess had hurt himself, which I have a different suspicion there, but that's just me. And then he wraps it up. The conclusion is, the doctor or evaluator writes here that there's some evidence to suggest that Hess was agitated and distressed, unable to tolerate the stress of continuing training. In combination with his own self-perceived feelings, he subsequently self-inflicted numerous lethal and non-lethal stab wounds using his Leatherman tool to his neck and torso, resulting in death, either to relieve stress or to punish himself. That's the psychological part of the autopsy that they did. And you asked me, like, did I think this guy killed himself? This type of training, going out to this type of training, it's hard for me to believe that he, like, became a murder victim by someone in his unit, but it really couldn't have been anyone else. I can't imagine someone being on base and it being a random.
But do you think that he was killed by somebody else, or do you think he killed himself? Okay, fine.
I think he killed himself.
Yeah, I do too.
I think it's just weird.
I was gonna let you ride the fence and answer this one, but I think he probably killed himself as well. And I actually think that I don't know that he meant to kill himself. He was certainly hurting himself. But the fact that he had bought the Leatherman tool and then that it was found with his blood on it, and I assume it matches. I mean, they determined forensically that was the weapon used, right?
Yeah, there were some questions about it, but ultimately it is the weapon used.
Right. And so, I mean, in that particular situation, which it's so interesting to me because I do feel like he could have taken it seriously enough that he basically felt that in the fratricide that he exhibited during the training exercises the training simulations that he was doing, I think that he could have been working really, really hard and failed at something, because I would assume if that had happened in real life, that would have been really hard to digest, right? If he had killed a couple of other companies or whatever.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so I feel like he could have been giving it his all and failed. And then there seems to be, in the time between the fratricide incidents and him being found dead, it seems to me like he was having trouble reconciling what went wrong. And I think that he was watching like all the work he had put into everything he was doing and he wasn't succeeding. He had failed really badly in his opinion. And I think that he was maybe disillusioned, but at least beside of himself about it, that he was like, oh my gosh, I've completely wasted my entire life, my entire career, and I can't even do this. And I think that it was out of just sheer exasperation. That's what I imagine happens. But I could see him I don't know that this is appropriate, but you know how like people cut themselves?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, sort of like that, but like, I don't feel like this was a thing that he did on a regular basis. I think he had just gotten to a point where he was like, I just don't know what to do with myself, right? Because he was just, if you've worked really hard at something and you've done everything you could do and you killed 2 other companies in a simulation and you don't understand how that happened or why you did that, but this is your entire life. Right. I think he was just at a point where he couldn't get himself back to feeling okay or normal or just not, crazy. And I think that was the solution. Now, I do think that I don't know that this could have been avoided, but I don't think that he was so much saying, I'm going to kill myself, as he was like, I've got to do something. Because the behavior that he's, like in the psychological autopsy that you read off, the behavior he's exhibiting all of that is signs of somebody who's they're under duress, right? The pacing, the, grabbing at somebody to be like, hey, I need to talk to you about the thing. I think that the stress put on him by the training simulations, I feel like they probably didn't prepare them psychologically well enough for what was happening there, because in theory, if you've got somebody like saying, "Oh no, you're going to be fine even though you made this mistake," I feel like they maybe weren't prepared, or him particularly was not prepared for the ramifications that came with the cause and effect of what was happening there. And he wasn't quite as tough as the program was designed, like the typical soldier they expect to be doing it. They felt like they could handle it better.
I see what you're saying. I think it would be more of an evaluation problem than it would be a preparation problem, because this is the preparation. They're going through the simulation to prepare them so that commanders in the battlefield aren't trying to boost up captains. They know where they're going to fail because they've already been through this type of training and preparation. This is also not a time of war. This is 1998. There's not a lot of battlefield training going on. This is going to be, he's training to see if he could stand up to the conditions. And the rest of what you said is accurate. He just was evaluated. They thought, yes, he can handle this. He's an officer. He's gone through the officer's candidate program to get here because he's a captain. He's been doing this for a minute. And now once it's happening, he doesn't stand up to what was happening.
I feel like they couldn't possibly know that it was going to make him like that insecure, though.
No, they could not have. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is part, like, it's not that they didn't prepare him, though. Like, there's no way to prepare somebody for the level of what happened here. And so this case takes a similar path. The family hires an outside autopsy, and they come in, and depending on who you read, what, where, when, you get similar results to Henry Lee and Cyril Reck with the Ellen Greenberg case. Homicide, suicide, homicide. But ultimately, this is a suicide because the criterion they use, which, okay, keep in mind, this was 1998 into 1999 that they were doing this. And the person who put all this together did it in 2011. So it was many years ago, even then. But the considerations he took, actually, let me go ahead and just say what these sources are, because like some of them are mine, some of them are his. But the source list for this is Practical Homicide Investigations from CRC Press, which is Vernon Gebreth. And then there is the Patterns in Shout Force Fatalities, a Comprehensive Forensic Medical Study, Part 1 and Part 2. Those are both from March of 1998 from the Journal of Forensic Sciences. Then he cites Ronald Maris and Alan Berman, The Assessment and Prediction of Suicide, and David Lester, Making Sense of Suicide, and Richard Fried, The Forensic Pathology Handbook, which is College of American Pathologists, and John Nordby, Can We Believe What We See If We See What We Believe? Expert Disagreement in the Journal of Forensic Sciences. All that having been said, he basically boils it down to explain their approach. And the approach they took was, they took a three-pronged approach to the suicide idea. This is when you're evaluating investigative considerations related to whether you're dealing with a homicide or a suicide. When you're doing that, you're doing a mini analysis, and the mini analysis is a quick test to see if you're in the right boat. And Vernon Gebreth, this is what he said. He said, the investigator should be aware of three basic considerations to establish if a death is suicidal in nature. I'm not saying I believe this. I'm saying in the 90s, this was a way to do it. 1, the presence of the weapon or means of death is at the scene. 2, injuries or wounds that are obviously self-inflicted or could have been inflicted by the deceased. And 3, the existence of a motive or intent on the part of the victim to take his or her own life. Those are the three considerations to start with. And he goes on the right, it should be noted that the final determination of suicide is made by a medical examiner or a coroner after all the facts are evaluated and examined. Okay, that having been said, most suicides that are off or weird, it almost comes out of desperation. They mention a couple in here. Hess has 26 stab wounds, and then there's a man from Philadelphia that has 35 stab wounds, and there's a woman from New Jersey they mentioned that has 31 stab wounds. So those were all considered to be suicides, and Hess is considered to be a suicide. when you get yourself in a situation where, one, you're out of your element. So this guy is not at home. Ellen Greenberg was in her apartment. This guy is on a base in a barracks. That is what I see as a major difference between the two cases. I just want to point that out because him doing it away from home, temporary circumstances, that's like a desperation. So him doing it, I kind of go, okay, well, now I understand what happened. It's crazy to me they didn't want to go home because you would think that would be enough. But
I think that it was beyond that point in his mind.
Yeah. And, they say that, like, I've heard this, and I think you probably heard it too. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Right. And it's literally where the "this too shall pass," catchphrase comes from. Like, sometimes in life, you literally just have to wait and, not kill yourself. But all of the behavior that's being described, it's almost like he just, for whatever reason, he wasn't able to, get through this. And there could have been a lot of things factoring into that, but I don't think that he ever would have dreamt that he would have committed suicide. I mean, and no. I don't even know that, like, while he was doing it, that was, I'm killing myself, or I'm escaping the hell that I'm in right now. Because I do feel like the way that he was described as acting leading up to him being found, and, the bunkmate thinking immediately that they needed to look in hotels and bars and all those other things. That says that, like, it was really apparent that he was struggling.
Yeah, it means that, like, there's been outside observations of the behavior. It wasn't completely internal. He wasn't sitting around. That's another thing that's sort of different. In Ellen Greenberg's case, it's a very clinical observation because she's seeing a psychiatrist.
I was going to say, we've got this information. Can you tell me about how Ellen's day was going? In Captain Hess's case, we've got several accounts from people who were around him leading up to his death. And I was just curious if you could tell me about Ellen's.
I'm not sure if I can tell you accurately.
Why is that?
Well, I have what's here, but it's a little different. She does not have the type of stress that he has.
Could you tell me?
Do you want to say, like, how Ellen's day was going? Or you want
I
me to
don't
pull up a
know.
document?
Well, I don't know because I never saw where, the people who were with her right before it happened, like, talked about it.
Well, the third person on their witness list that they went and, like, evaluated and decided it was worthy of reporting, because they do the fiance, that's their first interview. The second interview is her parents together, so that's sort of the second interview. The third person is the psychiatrist. They go and talk to her, which tells you that there had been, exactly what is described in these other circumstances, a history of psychiatric health concern. Because she was seeing a psychiatrist. It doesn't matter what they were. They don't have to be like a certain level before they count. But that was the third person that the cops went and talked to. And my point isn't that, like, she had psychiatric health concerns. My point is she was seeing a psychiatrist, which, if you're a police officer in this situation, you can jump to that conclusion pretty quickly. Here's what that psychiatrist said. Is that what you want me to put out there? Or?
No, I want to know what Sam said was happening before he left for the gym.
Does he have a statement in here on this?
No, he doesn't have a statement. That's my point. I think it's relevant to either suicide or homicide or undetermined.
Okay, so you're not speaking literally like go find that information. You're saying like it would be important to determine.
Well, I mean, if you had found it, you could say it. But I'm saying we've got this information from Captain Hess from just random people, basically, that he was interacting with during the time leading up to his death, right? I haven't seen Sam say, well, when I left, she was grading papers or reading her email or whatever, right?
Because, do you think the answer is when I left, she was like dead on the kitchen floor?
Well,
do you think that's the answer, or you think it's like she was doing something else.
Well, I think that it would be relevant to like establishing. So, okay, I find it really discouraging. For one thing, I just want to comment. You're right. Law enforcement would jump to the conclusion that somebody seeing a psychiatrist could just automatically be suicidal. I just want to point out that most of the time when people commit suicide, it's because they're not getting help.
So you're at, like, my point was Ellen Greenberg being, see, honestly, I thought it would be more the medication thing. That was why I think they went to talk to her, is because they find these prescription meds and they want to know what they're for. So that's why they go like beeline it for her.
Right. And usually anxiety doesn't lead somebody to commit suicide. It's usually depression that does. And she was being treated for anxiety.
Yes, she was being treated for anxiety. So in the pull down from what we started with, those three questions, if you like sort of check the boxes on that, this is where I want to get back to Ellen in just a second. If you pull it down, like today, it's like a medico-legal app. It's an app, and you just, once you get the first three filled out, yes, they could have a weapon. Yes, there's potential they might harm themselves. Yes, that's how it appears. You get 7 more questions. The first one is, could the deceased have caused the injuries and death, which is one of the questions in Ellen's case, is could she have caused all the injuries? And if she was dead, no, she could not have caused post-mortem injuries. The second one was the person physically able to accomplish the act? The third one was, are the wounds within reach of the deceased? The fourth one is, are the wounds grouped together? The fifth question is there more than one cause of death, like strangulation and exsanguination, which we've seen before? The sixth is describe the nature and position of the injuries. And seventh is, are there any hesitation marks? And that's sort of where they would go to try and flesh this out more as a suicide than a homicide. But once you go down that path, you're really not going to look back for suspects. And you're also creating all sorts of legal issues down the road if you're considering it a suicide and going back to try and look at it as a homicide. If we go through Gordon Hess's case, what we'll find is Gordon Hess's widow spent quite a bit of time trying to find out what happened to her husband. And she was not quite as prolific as the couple who are Ellen Greenberg's parents in getting attention to his case. And depending on what you read when, there's one last quote from this report I think is worth acknowledging. Depending on what you read when, you could have different experts sort of support you based on how the information was presented and what they knew at that time and sort of like where they were in their career. I think one of the biggest problems here was having Army CID work on this and then having civilian authorities that the family could afford trying to work on it. This is Hess's case. Here's what was interesting that was a huge difference, and I was curious about your opinion on. In Hess's case, it's his wife, his widow, who is pushing and pushing and pushing that case to be either declared undetermined or to be a homicide. It stays a suicide as far as paperwork goes. I am curious what you think of the fact that it's Ellen Greenberg's parents, not her fiance.
It could be 2 different things. One could be like the fact that he is so certain that she committed suicide, right?
Yeah.
That, he doesn't want to dwell on it. The parents didn't find her, right? He did. And I think that just like in Captain Hess's case, his wife didn't find him. She wasn't there. She talked to him briefly on the phone like the night before. And so she has questions. I don't know that she was like 100% cognizant of like what all was happening, right? Like how distressed he really was. I mean, she says he was distressed, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like it's that lack of, because the guy that he was his bunkmate was immediately concerned he had committed suicide, right? Because he had experienced what he was doing leading up to that point. Okay. And so in this case, Sam was with her before he went to the gym. And it seems like that would be relevant to the investigation, but I haven't seen it anywhere as far as what was happening. Her parents didn't come back and find her, and they didn't feel like putting 2 and 2 together was getting them to 4. They felt like it didn't add up. Now, I think it's similar. You can tell me what you think, but the shallowness of the stabs in both of these cases are relevant.
Yeah, it is very relevant. It's relevant in who was inflicting the injuries and also who was able to inflict the injury. Like, could they do it to themselves? Were they hesitating? Or was it an outside force? Because with an outside force, it tends to be deeper. Is that what you're referencing?
Right. And the fact, and just when you're looking at, 26 stab wounds. And so I feel like that becomes relevant. But I don't know really. But so he either was really, really sure that she had committed suicide and he had absolutely no doubt, or
it's the best possible outcome because he knew different.
Right. And so, I don't want to really, we
can't really go down that path though at this point because he doesn't, so he's not protesting it.
Which it's for one of those reasons. Now, okay, it's either because he's 100% certain that she committed suicide, or he's 100% certain that he wants it to stay that she committed suicide. And, which one is it? Well, according to everybody involved, she committed suicide so far. The officials involved have gone that way. It would be different, in my opinion, if they hadn't initially called it a homicide, okay, because that happened, whether they want to, whether it was retracted or, overruled or whatever, it was initially called a homicide. So why was it initially called a homicide? Because it looked insane that she would have been able to do that to herself, right?
Well, so that's where, in both of these instances, there were similar things that happened. With Doreen Hess, basically, you get a notification unit, which consists of a chaplain and other people who come and tell you that your loved one has passed away in the military. When they came to her house, they told her that her husband had been the victim of a violent assault and that they were looking for a suspect. But then the Army basically fooled her with the news that it was gonna, well, I don't want to say fooled, that's not the right word. They basically confused her by saying, we're going to be now calling this a suicide. And then they released the information.
I think it would be fair to say that the people who told her he suffered a violent attack, they probably had no idea.
Yeah, they were just being given some very basic information to go and give to her. She fights it for several years. I've included in the show notes several links to sort of what she was trying to do there, because it is worth reading how that all went down. So here's where the homicide part becomes problematic. I think that whenever there's a suspicious death, most jurisdictions, whether it's a police force, a village police force, a town police force, a city, sheriff's office, a state bureau of investigation, or the federal bureau of investigation, Army CID or NCIS, any of these investigative services, if there is a suspicious death, the first place it typically goes is to the police in the event a crime has been committed. And that's to try and preserve as much evidence as possible in the event they have to have a prosecution later. So suspicious deaths sometimes are treated as homicides. And that's what you'll hear in the news or look at when you see on a news release. This death is being treated as suspicious. The homicide unit of blah, blah, blah agency or blah, blah, blah police department is investigating this as a suspicious death. because that's their ballywig, that's their thing that they do. They end up investigating cases that can sometimes turn out to be accidents or natural or suicides. Whether or not this case is one of those, and I'm saying that, I'm going to say either one of these cases right now because we're, throwing Gordy Hess into all of this, and we've got Ellen Greenberg. I think that the cases, the reason they get some legs under them as far as the media goes and the true crime community goes is because they're so weird. I would say there's marked differences between the two, these two cases. Suicides with multiple stab wounds. He doesn't have any to the head. There's that. He is away from home. She is at home. He's had a stressful incident. She's seeing a psychiatrist, and we're not totally sure how that would affect it. But your feeling is that somebody seeing a psychiatrist would be less likely to commit suicide.
Yeah.
He doesn't even know that he has a problem yet.
Well, and I think I don't know that he had a long-term problem. I don't know that it wasn't just situational, but it was enough. Even, if it was just situational, it was enough for him to be so overwhelmed.
Well,
I do think it's possible that depending on what would have been the answers to some of my questions, like, what was happening leading up to Sam finding Ellen, on the floor of the kitchen. Could she have had like something that was so, whatever the emotion was, that, she lost it and she was somehow punishing herself? It seems like it would be pretty extreme. It also, it sort of made me wonder, I can't really get inside of her head. It seems almost like she would have called one of her parents, if like it had gotten to such a breaking point.
That's an interesting idea. I don't have any information supporting or contradicting that, but that sounds interesting to me.
Well, I feel like without it being like sort of a snapped suicide, right? I do feel like somebody could unintentionally stab themselves and it get out of hand. I can feel the rage that somebody stabbing themselves to death would feel. It's where that "this too shall pass" thing comes in, where you have to like breathe and like not live the compulsion of doing it, right?
Right. I
can also see where like at a breaking point, somebody just says, screw it. and that's where they end up, right? I feel like I wish that if they really truly treated her case like a homicide case, I feel like we'd have some more information. And I feel like it would point way clearer to it being a suicide. And I also think, do you think it's possible she could have wanted to kill herself and she was mad at Sam and wanted it to be a question?
Okay, so that may be our next episode, by the way.
I have to
So
say,
spouses that or loved ones ever framed another loved one for
I have to say that not leaving a note really makes me question sort of the validity of anybody's suicide, honestly. But it just, I mean, is it possible?
This is in a series, and you're going to have one more chance to talk about this because that is, so I want to address two things in the last episode, and we're going to do that. But I want to say this before I talk about those two things. First of all, it always bothers me when there's an activity going on and someone stops to kill themselves. Have you ever noticed that?
It's so weird.
And in this case, the thing that stood out to me, and I don't know if you saw this in the descriptions. I don't think you didn't see the photos, right? The crime scene photos. You saw the recreation stuff.
Yeah.
So there's two things I want to mention as we wrap this particular piece up. The first one is you said to me earlier. You said, "Did I think some of these were not stabs?" And the answer is yes. I do believe that some of these are not stabs.
Well, I mean, yes.
They are cuts instead of stabs.
but they're counted as stabs. And
yeah.
When I initially see something that says like 26 stab wounds, and then I see the recreation, and I can see where like literally, like I said, where I've scratched my dry skin is worse than, these stab wounds. It makes me sort of wonder. And then the next thing I think to myself is, who would kill somebody like that?
Well, okay, so it's got to be personal as far as I'm concerned.
But personal would be deeper.
Well, I'm with you on that too. All right, the wrap up for today, and then next time we're going to talk about some other things related to people who are seeing psychiatrists who commit suicide. But who the hell kills themselves while they're cutting fruit?
Well, have you ever heard of the term death by 1,000 cuts? The sentence, I guess.
I've heard of that statement, yes.
Okay, and what does that imply if you say like it's something is death by 1,000 cuts?
Slow, painful torture?
Right, and so it's...
Isn't that a Taylor Swift song? I don't know.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, it is. But there's also there's also other references to, death. So imagine somebody like not dying until their body had 1,000 cuts on it. That's what I'm getting at here. Okay. Instead of, just one shot to the head, they've cut themselves 1,000 times. And the other thing was like, did she bleed to death? Because it doesn't look like it.
That is what I kind of, I don't know.
Did she stop her heart from beating, like when she stabbed herself in the heart? Did she really zip her hoodie up? Like, what the hell?
The other guy didn't. He unzipped his.
Well, I know, and I'm not entirely certain that I understood it correctly. Okay, I could have misunderstood. Now, maybe who kills themselves while cutting fruit? Well, I would say that somebody who was like so disappointed in themselves that they wanted to literally like painfully long torture themselves into death. Now, does this apply to Ellen? Well, I have no idea because it doesn't seem like that information is available. According to her parents, no, it does. Like she wouldn't have wanted that for herself, but we have no idea what she was really going through.
Well, that was the thing that bothered me the most about Ellen's case is I see the fruit on the counter and all I can think to myself as I hear the rest of it is, so first of all, I don't know that much about Sam after having gone all the way through all of this. I don't know much about Sam Goldberg. I can't find much about him that's reliable. But the second thing is, I don't really know that much about Ellen.
Right. And, the pictures show blueberries.
Yeah.
Well, how do you like your blueberries cut up?
In a bowl with a spoon.
Well, exactly. It's just weird.
That's not what was cut. The cuts were to the mandarins on the counter. There were mandarin oranges there to the left of the blueberries.
So do you think it's possible that she couldn't get something cut and she lost her temper? And because the knife box was upended, it was like on its side when it should have been vertical.
Right.
And there were several knives in the sink. So it's almost like, one knife's dull and you're irritated, so you like throw it in the sink, and then when you're pulling the next knife out, you knock the block over and you're like, well, screw it, and you just throw that knife in the sink too, and then you grab like a third knife and you're like, you know what, I hate everything, and you're just suddenly stabbing yourself to death.
I mean, to be fair, she was teaching small people.
Well, not at that moment.
No, but I mean, like, I can imagine there's a level of frustration that comes with all of that.
Well, I could imagine something like, all those save the date cards that you just sent out? Well, we're not getting married.
Oh.
So now you need to send out forget the date cards.
Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.